Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm as always your host, Rudy Robertson, and today we have a very fun episode which, if I didn't stop him, we wouldn't have started the episode because we were talking about a bunch of stuff before the recording started. Welcome to the show, Ross Scott, who you may know online as the Stop Killing Games guy. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. I've not been following the initiative as closely as I should be, but I did see that initial push for it. I was aware of the Australian petition as well, and yeah, this is something that kind of needed to happen. Even though I've seen some of the results that have been coming from the petitions that have already finished, and they're not been as positive as you may have wanted.
Yeah. Well, I guess should I explain to your audience what
Yeah,
we're
I think
doing?
good place to start is right there.
It's a good
Yeah.
place to start. This Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement I've founded where we're trying to challenge the legality of publishers selling you a video game for shutting it down after an undisclosed length of time, and then making it so that no sane person has a chance of ever running it again. Occasionally there's these super geniuses who reverse engineer these things over years and then get it. And the thing is, the legality of that has not been tested in many countries. And it's sort of like the analogy I always make is it's kind of like when Uber first came on the scene, where governments weren't sure, well, wait a minute, are these taxi services? Are these employees or contract? The law just wasn't written for something like that, and they had to figure it out. And even though this practice has been going on, that specific practice, I think about 20 years, video games tend to get ignored by a lot of government and regulators unless there's something really controversial happening. So there's actually possible openings in this in multiple countries. Unfortunately, not the United States. That seems very locked down from what I've seen, but Australia is one of them, where you are. I've been trying to push this in every angle I was able to find, which was like 11. And you mentioned, and some of those were direct petitions to government. Some of those have concluded, like Australia, Canada, UK part 1 concluded. That one was a weird situation. However, we also have had a lot of success in escalating this issue at consumer protection agencies, because there was a game that shut down last year that was kind of a perfect candidate to have this tested, called The Crew, which is a big open world racing game by Ubisoft that they shut down. And that one was a great candidate because it sold a fair number of copies, at least 12 million, or at least 12 million owners. It got a little complicated. It also, so that meant we were still able to find people who had receipts of all this stuff, because, a lot of people just get rid of it and never look at it again. Also, they were located in France, which is one of the most has some of the most pro-consumer law in the world, which is excellent odds for us. And the other thing is, it's what I would call a clean kill, where they shut down that game. No one can run it in any form. It wasn't like, oh, they killed the multiplayer, but the single player still works, or they killed the DLC, but the base game still works, or they changed the game from 1.0 and 5.0 is totally different that people are upset about. So it's like any regulator who doesn't understand anything about video games is probably going to understand this, where you bought the game, they didn't tell you how long it lasted, they shut it down, now nobody can ever run it again. So it's like the planets aligned to push that through. So that was one avenue. And the other were the petitions, and the biggest of those is actually considered more than a petition. It's called the European Citizens Initiative, where if we can get enough signatures on that, then we propose new law to the European Union that says publishers would be required to leave the games in a reasonably working state at the time of shutdown without having to connect to them or other third parties or something like that. So yeah, that's the, if we can get the signatures on that, I think we end this in a good way. But getting the signatures is hard. We're about 40% of where we need to be, and the deadline's at the end of July or early August, somewhere around there. So, and unfortunately, only European Union citizens are eligible. So,
well, I don't know if this might surprise you, but a lot of people in my audience and just in the Linux audience in general, there is like a very high proportion of people in the EU. I think my second biggest group is, I think it's Germany. Yeah, I think it's US and then Germany. So if you're interested in, you know, not just games like The Crew, but whether it's something like an MMO, whether it's a live service game, whether you're like any game like this, or just generally interested, even if you don't play them, generally interested in consumer protection, this is something that you definitely should be looking into.
yeah, I'll just give my quick pitch right now.
Go right ahead.
You are in the European Union, or you know someone is, or you can get like a friend or family member to sign this, go to stopkillinggames.com. There's a button to click on there that will take you to the European Union petition, European Citizens Initiative. Just try to get more signatures if you can, because this is our best shot. Now, if that fails, we still have other shots with the consumer protection agencies, but I give all those coin toss odds based on, whereas I think we win if we do this, because that's another thing worth mentioning. Even though we're only talking about like the EU or Australia, if we have a win in one of those countries, I think globally, most gamers get the benefits downstream, because then the video game industry is going to have to think, okay, well, if we have to have an end-of-life plan to sell in Australia, or especially the EU, which is a population of like 450 million, it's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper to just, add an end-of-life plan, especially for games we haven't made yet, for ones that are, in the design phase onward, than it will be to miss out on millions of sales in those. So they're just going to take the path of least resistance. And actually, in Australia, there's an analogy to this, where when the ACCC sued Valve over not allowing refunds, and Valve lost the case, and after that, they just rolled out refunds globally, because they probably figured, hey, it's not worth it in court fees or whatever to just keep, versus the money we're going to lose from allowing refunds. And now it's pretty common practice to just be able to refund a game that you buy digitally. I think this will be the same thing, because if they make one end-of-life plan, they may as well release the others, and just be done with it.
Whilst you do say that, and I do agree in the Valve case, there are going to be cases like Apple is a great example here, with the way that Apple's handling their requirement to allow alternative app stores. Jailbreaking. It's jailbreaking. In the EU, they're like, okay, we're fine with this, but then specifically put in software locks for the rest of the world. Whilst most companies wouldn't go about that, and I would hope most would be like Valve, and they just say, okay, it's just easier like this, there are going to be companies that will try to sort of like implement it in the most minimal way possible.
Yeah, that there's a risk of that. Like you said, I think most wouldn't, because that's going to get bad PR for not much money,
right?
But no, there is a risk some would do that. But even then, I mean, it's kind of like was Jurassic Park, life finds a way kind of thing. Like, because if it's a popular game, and let's say only the French copy gets preserved, there's going to be people who are, if it's a game people like, they're really going to try and get a hold of that French copy and get like a translation patch or something. It's worth stating that this whole movement, it does not solve all the problems with games preservation. What we're really doing is targeting the worst of the worst, where when these games shut down, literally no one on the planet can run them again. So if we were to try to do more than that, we would you basically have to rewrite copyright law, and that would just that'll be 100 times harder than what we're doing. That would invite the likes of Disney, the recording industry, so we don't want to go to, we're trying to keep this as contained as possible as like a consumer issue, so that, if you really want to play a game, it should be possible.
Right. Yeah, you don't. No one wants to get on the bad side of Disney or the what is it? The RCCC? No, the US recording.
RIAA.
That one, RIAA. Both are very litigious. Nintendo's bad enough. You can bother Nintendo, but at least like Nintendo doesn't seem to really engage in this, so they are like kind of off to the side.
That's another point I remembered, is another reason we might be able to get this through is this isn't like loot boxes, which I'm also not a fan of, but I'm not even trying to tackle that. Where if some companies can't sell loot boxes, that's an existential threat to them because they're making so much money hand over fist on some games.
I'm sure you remember when there was that proposed Chinese law to, I think it was like to either limit it or completely remove it, and there was a bunch of limitations for how kids could play games and when they could play games, and all of a sudden Tencent stock just went like this.
Yeah, I think part of it was like how many hours they allowed or something like that.
I know loot boxes were a part of it, but it was a bunch of stuff in it as well.
Yeah, it's so the cost of doing this, again, if it's for a future game that you're still designing, it's very minimal. I mean, it's going to vary a lot depending on what kind of game. Like an MMO is going to have probably very different requirements than something like an arena shooter with 10 people or something, But for existing games, that's the thing with the European Citizens Initiative. This would not be retroactive. So if it passed, it would be from that point onward. And for existing games, again, it's going to vary all over the place. Some companies, it'll be as easy as just adding a couple lines to allow private servers once they end support, so you can just connect to an IP address and then they're done. Others, it might literally be impossible just because they have license agreements for like existing middleware or server software that there's like, well, okay, we do not have permission to give away this software.
Right.
Games like that, I mean, it would be up to the European Union in that case, but it would they would either have to be retired by a certain date or else they might get grandfathered in. So, okay, if you were already operating a game this way by, let's say, a year or two from now, and the law goes into effect, okay, you get an exemption, but any new game moving forward, you need an end-of-life build once you end support.
I think with games that are running now, at the bare minimum, at least giving players notice in advance would be better than what we have. Because, you've seen cases like the most extreme examples recently, like Concord, where it lasted a couple of days and just dies.
Yeah, in the case of Concord, I'm actually not sure if what we're doing will protect that or not.
Okay.
Because they refunded everybody.
Okay, that's a good point there.
If you're refunding every single person who bought your game, okay, well, that's a hell of an incentive for companies not to kill the game.
Sure, I completely forgot about the refunds. Yeah, if you're going to give... to be fair, they just sold that many copies anyway. But if you're going to give all the money back, sure, nothing lost. I would like to...
Well, I mean, there's a little bit lost, but then everybody loses. There's no incentive to do that. It's not... Like, in fact, companies would be far more motivated not to than I think they'd be much more motivated to not do that than players might be upset about that.
Sure.
So,
like, it's annoying to still lose the game there, but if you're getting your money back, it's like returning a physical product. You wouldn't expect to still have the product then. Like, that's understandable there.
Yeah, that's another thing. This wouldn't affect also completely free games. Like, I think, was it Realm of the Mad God might be like that, where it's online only, but it's all free.
Or Marvel Rivals.
If it's free, then there's no real commerce going on.
Right.
So we're not trying to step in on that. For free-to-play games, surprisingly, I know I'm going to sound like a radical to some people listening to this, but I think they might qualify also,
Okay.
where you're not entitled to the game because it is free. However, if it has microtransactions and you buy like a virtual sword or a skin or something, well, you paid for that. And if they didn't give you an expiration date or anything, then under the law, it might be seen as extremely similar, if not exactly the same, as selling a video game with a one-time purchase and no expiration date. Actually, Australia specifically has a legal term for this sort of thing called was undisturbed possession,
Okay.
where the idea is like, yeah, if you're, when the law was probably formed, the idea might be is like, say you had a rancher and he sold you a horse. And it's like, okay, so you come to pick up the horse, but then he has all this barbed wire on his property saying no trespassing. So he's saying, well, yeah, the horse is yours, but you can't come on my property, you know? So it's like, it's kind of a cheap trick to like swindle people, you know, where the idea is, you know, you sold this, but you're putting up this other barrier that makes it impossible for you to keep it or collect it. And that's the angle for free-to-play games with microtransactions. Now, you mentioned the time frame. One thing I think we have extremely poor odds of saving are games that are true subscriptions, where in other words, you pay like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14, where you pay money after 30 days or 6 months or whatever you pay for, you know, that's it. Your access is up. Well, that tends to meet the definition of a service.
Right. I was going to bring up like software as a service and the relation with that. Like if you say, for example, you are paying for Adobe Creative Cloud and then let's say Adobe goes out of business tomorrow, right? Or you stop paying for your Creative Cloud. Like there's definitely some similarities there with the MMO model.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of that either, but I mean, I have to be realistic. I'm just seeing no provisions in consumer law to protect against that. I think literally our only shot on that in particular is with the European Citizens Initiative. If that passed, we might be able to make the argument that there should be some requirement on the basis of cultural preservation. Because normally that has almost no legal teeth at all. But if it's piggybacking on this other initiative, which has a much stronger consumer basis, maybe we can get something. But even if we don't, that's not the worst scenario, because how many games still do that? I want to say it's like 10 or less. You know, it's mostly this old guard MMOs that manage to survive that are still doing the subscription model. Again, like, you know, World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy names go way back.
RuneScape and there's not many other like sub MMO. And even RuneScape, that has a free-to-play mode as well.
EVE Online has... And even then, it gets a little weird with because they have free versions also. But I guess that's almost like a gray area inside a gray area. That's not worth getting into. But I guess so. It's so few games where, I mean, out of games now that have an online only connection, so that's the only way you can play it. I want to say the subscription ones where you have to buy a subscription. That's got to be like what, 1 to 2% of them.
Even I doubt it's even that much. It's probably like 0.1%.
Yeah, so those are acceptable losses. And for people worrying that, oh, if this passed and everything is going to go subscription only, well, we've already been there with MMOs in the early 2000s and the mid 2000s. Lots of companies were jumping on that bandwagon of like, hey, sign up for our game, because they all saw the World of Warcraft money. But almost all of them ended up either dying or going free to play on a different business model because that just worked out better. So believe me, if companies thought they could get away with charging subscription fees for all their big games, they would. You know, they wouldn't need to have a law to incentivize them on that.
Well, yeah, they've realized because of, you know, other very lax laws around child gambling, it's a lot more profitable to have a free-to-play game. You make a lot more money not charging people money for it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, like, again, while I'm not a fan of that,
it's outside of the scope.
Nothing that we're doing would interfere with existing business models, except once they're done, once support ends. So if if they want to run the game exactly as they are now for another 10 years, fine. That's we're trying to keep the scope as narrow as possible to maximize our odds on this. So.
Okay, so when we talk about the kinds of affected games, I think it's important to talk about like what the differences between those are, because you have your live service games and then you have your single player games that have an online connection, and then you have your like sub MMOs, which are still live service, but you're paying specifically for access. And just so we're like everyone's clear on what we're talking about here.
Sure. Again, they're gonna think I'm a radical here, but the thing to remember is you're thinking more as a gamer. You need to think more as a lawmaker, and the law does not really distinguish between single player, multiplayer, MMOs. I mean, I stopped and think about it. The only thing I can think of is like, when they put the content ratings for online only games, they say, well, your online interactions are unrated. There's that. There are a lot of laws on privacy and data collection, but that can happen in a single player game too that connects online. So there's not really a legal distinction here. So I'm thinking, well, why make one? I mean, that's why we kind of kept the language a little broad deliberately to give developers and publishers maximum flexibility with how to address this. Like, again, in the Citizens Initiative, we say leave them in a reasonably playable state. Well, by wording it that way, we're not insisting 100% of all features work on the end of life build. Like, let's say the game it was like an arena shooter. They give you an end of life build, but now matchmaking and achievements don't work. Right. Well, close enough. I think. Whereas if they give you an end of life build and all you can do is just get a login screen, which you can't get past, that's not good enough. And then people would report that to agencies, and then they would probably get fined for that. So, because for the developer, for some, their source code is going to be sacred and they don't want to release that to anybody. So they're going to say, okay, we'll just patch the client to be able to accept like private servers and connections, and then we'll call it a day in that, and they can't see what was behind there. Others are thinking, well, we don't want to mess with this anymore. Fine, here's our code and server tools. Have fun trying to run it, and then just shut it down so it's a minimum amount of work. So, yeah, the analogy I make is, if you have a stop sign, your car needs to stop by the stop sign. We're not saying most people are going to use their brakes. Some people, you could use the handbrake. You could do a rolling stop where you coast. We're not dictating that part, just saying stop at that stop sign. Now, for single player MMOs, so under that, by asking for a reasonable working state, most games are already compliant. If you buy a game and when the studio shuts down and support ends, but you can still run it without having to connect to them, great, you're already compliant. For ones that require a connection, like for a single player game that requires a connection, let's say for DRM, well, then they would have to disable the DRM at that point once they shut it down. For, I guess, like smaller scale multiplayer games, like, again, arena shooters kind of thing, those, I think, to have like a reasonable, like, let's say if they're multiplayer focused, I think you'd have to allow private server support, not support, but functionality on some level.
Right.
Once they shut down. So
you don't have to provide it, but you have to allow people to connect to a external IP address.
Yeah, exactly. External IP address, and people can host it, kind of like the old school, like lots of deathmatch shooters, things like that.
Go play Quake or something like that, yeah.
And like the top end of the spectrum will be like an MMO. Let's say it's very ambitious one too, where there's no way this server can run on just consumer hardware. Well, in that case, they would have to release a build of it where, or just, well, I'll get to another topic later, but example would be they release a build of it. Let's say it is for some custom like server shard that, specialized hardware. Fine, good enough. If the players are dedicated enough, they'll find a way to host that, or maybe they'll find some hacks for it to get it working on a x86 machine or something, and give it that way. As long as they're giving customers a reasonable chance. So if it's not, again, plenty of games, it may not be even possible to run it on what the client was running on. But in those scenarios, fine, give us some repair tools. And the topic I was going to mention, part of the reason this was actually a debate with the initiative, the official initiative members. I'm actually not a part of that officially. I helped organize it, but once it launched, then it's out of my hands. But I'm in touch with them, obviously. But they were considering putting a reasonably playable states, or the part we were considering adding was, or the ability to a reasonable chance of repairing it. So in other words, okay, we're not giving you the code, but we are giving you all this documentation on how the network protocols work, and we're decrypting like the packets and stuff like that, so that you'd have so that knowledgeable people could have a fighting chance of making an emulator, maybe within a couple weeks, just if they have all the documentation there, as opposed to years trying to reverse engineer this crap.
Right.
But the reason we didn't include that is that's actually a bit of a bargaining chip. It's kind of an open secret, where if the initiative passes the signature threshold, then it goes to the European Union Commission, and then they'll decide, like, okay, how best to implement this.
Right.
I mean, and they might want to like have some compromises, and that's a perfectly acceptable compromise as long as we have a fighting chance of running the game, versus just everything locked down, no documentation, no server software, where it's just I don't even know how the people who get emulators do it.
I don't know. Like, there's been RuneScape private servers for years. There's been WoW private servers. There is a very early project. It's been early for many years, called Project Sapphire for FF14 private servers. I don't know how they do it. It's yeah.
And the thing is, it's usually only the biggest games that get that kind of treatment too. So
either the biggest games or the ones that do a lot of stuff client side.
Yeah. So we're really trying to tackle all of it. The weakest being subscription fee, because there's no consumer law that would say like, oh, this is unreasonable. They're telling you how long it lasts. Now, of course, personally, again, I want any game that people really care about to be possible to be saved personally. But again, we're just going with what can happen.
A term that I've heard you use in some videos is video game kill switch. And just for people listening, I think it's a good idea to explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, that's an attempt for me to explain this to just the average person who doesn't know much about hardware or video games, because they too tend to understand kill switches, you know, where, and here's the thing, it depends on the company culture, but setting up a game that you're selling like a copy of, you know, the way you would as a good, and in fact, I think in Australia, they might be considered goods, depending on how they're sold. You know, if someone can remotely disable that, that's what a kill switch is. Now, I think the intent of many developers and publishers isn't necessarily as a kill switch. I think it's more negligence. They just, okay, well, our goal is to get the game working and sell it. Okay, now we've sold most of it. There was no thought put towards what happens once we're done. So we shut it down, it goes down, and since we're not required to do anything, we don't.
Right.
I think that's the motivation behind companies for like 90% of cases. There's an argument for a few that they sometimes want them shutting down purposefully so they can sell you like the sequel in a franchise or something. But I think that's a minority. From what I've heard, it does happen, but I don't think that's the main driving force. I think the main driving force is...
Similar to that is cases where the second game directly replaces the first one. Like, you know, with, wasn't it with Warcraft 3 Reforged? They stopped selling the original version on Battle.net.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't checked. If you have the original Warcraft 3, can you play that online with people now? Like that it's or because it supported private servers, but I think you had to go through BattleNet to do it. And if BattleNet doesn't allow it,
I don't know. I haven't
don't
played the
know.
game myself. Sorry, I just want to bring that up as an example.
No, yeah, that's why it can be hell parsing all this stuff because sometimes people say, "Oh, it allows private servers."
Right.
Well, okay, but if you have to authenticate at the central server in order to run the private server, then it's technically yes, it is a private server, but it's not what people think of for a private server. Or yeah, like I think what is it? Vermintide. You know, you can run custom servers on that, but you still have to authenticate that. So you can't just set one up, connect to your friend, you know, down the road or something, and without going through their central server. Yeah, that's a game I would put in the at-risk category, where it's running now, but if they just stop the servers, then that game's unplayable. So,
right, we're talking about video game kill switches. So what are you like? What?
Okay, so, sorry.
I'm
okay. So
words aren't working right now.
No, I can get off track. The kill switch is, again, by having the power of the publishers for you to run your game of this nature. Sorry, tripping over my words. To run a game of this nature where you have to connect online to them or to their affiliated parties or something. That means that your ability to run the game is 100% in their control. And when they end the support, it's cut off immediately. Well, that is effectively a kill switch where, you know, they are in control over whether you can run your game. And now some people might be saying, well, okay, well, yeah, but that's normal for a service. You know, you don't like, you know, Netflix cuts off your, you know, subscription after you pay that. But the thing is, almost every other service, they tell you how long it's going to last. You know that exactly. And the thing is, companies selling games like this, they do not want to put that, because if there was an expiration date, like let's say they're planning to support it for 4 years, that would be bad news for the companies on every level. And I think they would rather have an end of life plan than have to put that label. Like let's say you buy a game and it says like on the box or on the store page, this game expires December 31st, 2029 or something. See, that creates two problems. One, that's going to depress sales because most people don't think about when the game's going to end.
Right.
Like some of them don't even know. I think so they're kind of riding on the psychology, because the historical expectation for how long a game lasts is indefinitely. You know, you can still play like an Atari game if you get the hardware still working. You know, even online multiplayer for a lot of them. Like if you bought a game from like the 90s, that's something like Descent. Okay, you can, if you still have the legacy hardware, or you know, more realistically, you get some fan-made patches or something that may work on modern internet infrastructure, you can connect online to other people, even though interplay doesn't even exist anymore. So this practice, well, I can get to that, but I lost my train of thought. I was trying to answer something. You're asking about the kill switch. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, these are not services under the legal definition. They're like in this weird gray area that just isn't defined well under the law. So you're not getting the expectation of a service, you know, where okay, I'm going to have this for 2 years or 4 years or something, but you're also having your product taken away from you if it's more like a good. So that's when. So by kill switch, they're able to remotely render your purchase inoperable, you know?
Yeah, companies like to thrive on obscurity, where if they can make it so you're not really sure when things are going to happen, where you don't really know how long the game's going to last for, it's really good for them. A good example of this that Valve cracked down on a couple of months ago was the way that companies were handling season passes, where they would sell a season pass when the game launches, and there'd be no indication of how much DLC you're going to get with it, when that DLC is going to come out, what's going to be in that DLC, and Valve was like, no, if you're going to sell a season pass, you need to say like what that's gonna contain.
Yeah, early access in disguise is how
That
I
yeah,
would
that
put
that's
it.
actually well, early access. They actually did a really good thing recently where they now have an update there or a note there saying when this game was last updated.
Yeah, I've heard there might be some workarounds to that where you could just change like one
Yeah,
byte and then resubmit. But well, I
yeah.
guess at least with people doing that, I guess those are either going to be the motivated scammers or else the people who no, they're still working on it. They're just trying to buy time for themselves. You know?
Well, Valve has player report, so if someone reported that the game actually hadn't changed, even though it said it had, and like the developers had gone like completely silent, like you could still resolve that by having people reporting there being an issue there. But I can see how you would at least try to work around that.
Yeah, I remember with the expiration date, the other reason companies don't want to do this is let's say the game's a flop. You know, well, they don't want to be on the hook for supporting it for 4 years. But on the conversely, if it's a big hit, well, then they don't want all the pages saying this is going to end in 4 years because
Right.
because it's like, no, we'll support this a long time because everybody loves it, you know? So everybody kind of loses with that on their end. So I think I think it would be cheaper just from depression of sales to just have an end of life plan if that was a requirement. So
You mentioned before about games with DRM needing to connect online to certify the DRM. This is a problem a lot of people ran into the other day with the PSN outage. People had a
yeah,
bunch of physical games, and people have thought, "Oh, I have a physical game. It works. It's physical." Nope, not if the servers are down.
yeah, that's kind of a I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. It's kind of like an outdated. It's becoming an outdated concept. Where once upon a time, it used to thought that if you have a physical copy, you're good. But if you're on the PC, so how that hasn't been true there for a long
Yeah, I remember
time. I
when
mean,
you would buy box games and you get a Steam code in the box.
yeah. Or there was another one where I think that I think there was like a Halo game where they released the game, but it just like all it did have a disc, but all that was on the disc was like an installer for,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
game
that's
was
been
like
a bunch of
or
games.
something
Yeah.
ridiculous. Yeah, like uh, the so physical versus digital is meaningless now because well, again, one of the games we pushed that was the candidate for this was The Crew. They have physical copies on Xbox, PlayStation. But on the flip side, like a GOG game, you can buy that, put it on a USB or something. That's it. It's yours for life, So it's all the main metric is if the company were to just shut down their servers today, would you still be able to play the game? If the answer is no, then it's at risk.
I don't think I've ever mentioned it, but with The Crew, what is the specific issue that The Crew has? Because you mentioned it had multiplayer, but for anyone who hasn't played the game, not really aware of it, like why is the single player not work?
Oh well, yeah, The Crew was it's an interesting scenario because there have been multiple games like this before that I would
Oh,
have acted
sure.
on if I thought we had a chance. Like the first one that kind of hit me was Battleforge. Then later there's one called Darkspore, but there's been lots of them like Dust 513, Hawken. Like there's a lot of games but The Crew is like just right. Yeah, this is another reason why the single player versus multiplayer versus MMO isn't that helpful with the law because, okay, The Crew is open world driving game. It contains a full single player campaign where you have cutscenes, a story, races as your levels. In between the races, you can drive across the country, and if you're online, which you had to be, you might see other players just driving along there. So it's kind of like they mixed the two in between. And you could race with up to 7 other players at the same time, so 8-player game total, but Ubisoft marketed this as an MMO. So it's like we're just checking off it's like we're taking all multiplayer, single player, MMO, just putting them in a blender and saying it's, so if we created an exception for MMOs or an exception for multiplayer, well, now we've just killed all the single player campaign. And like there are other games like this, like Destiny or Destiny 2, Where is that a single player or multiplayer? Well, it's kind of both. They really blend together. Or Need for Speed 2015 is like that. The Division, that's another one where it's like we're really blurring the lines between what single player or multiplayer means. It's more like how you want to play it.
Right.
So
I think a example of a company that has handled that model well is the way that From Software does it with the Souls games, where it's obviously a very different kind of game, but you think about it in the abstract. It's a fully single player game, cutscenes, all that stuff, but you can, if you're online, players can invade your world and you can fight them. But if you're offline, game works perfectly fine. A good example of this is the early versions of Dark Souls 1, which had really, really bad remote code execution bugs. So they took the servers offline because they could not keep that going. They had no idea how to fix it and just weren't going to touch it. So they shut the servers down, but the only thing that broke in that game was the online connectivity and any of the quests that were connected to that, because you couldn't, invade people. You couldn't do like the any of the factions you could join that were related to that. But besides that, like, those games are exactly the way you would want this to work.
yeah, or like I think another thing was like players could leave each other messages.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's the sort of thing where if that was the standard, like you are losing some features when the support goes down, but if that was the standard for games that are primarily a single player thing, I probably never would have started this campaign. But now that I've had to go through all this crap and time and energy to get underway, it's like, well, let's just end this. Let's take our best shot at ending this once and for all, since I've had to go through all this trouble. And again, it varies so much on the game, how practical it is and how the features. Well, actually, I think the practicality, again, I think it's, as long as you're giving the players a chance, good enough. That's how I feel about it. Because if it's a game players really want to play, and there's all these hoops they have to jump through with getting it working, post support, that's fine. Whereas if it's, let's say the game wasn't very good, nobody really wants to play it again, they just release like this kind of half-ass build, well, fine. Then if nobody wants to play it, then fine, nobody needs to play it. It's just that don't take away the possibility for those who do want to and paid money for it. So.
Yeah, I think that sort of leads into... Oh, go on. You going to say something?
No, you might be going the same place I am. I'll let you talk.
I was going to say, that sort of leads into a lot of like criticism of what you're trying to do here. And I know you've probably dealt with it a million times. If you search Stop Killing Games, the first autofill is Stop Killing Games Pirate Software. And I don't know how much you want to talk about that. But
we can talk about whatever you want. I guess before I get to that, what I was going to... Well, this ties into criticisms. Another common criticism you see... Well, our first and foremost criticism that we ever get is you can't expect companies to support games forever. Right. And it was never about that. It's not about that, never was, but they can end it any time they want. We're all in favor of that. Like another common criticism is that, well, you're not actually, well, it might be different in Australia. It hasn't been tested specifically, but you're not buying a good or a service. You're buying a license, and the license says that they can end this game at any time. So you should have known better, and blah blah blah. Well, in the United States, that's pretty much how it's going to go. There's a lot of legal precedent that backs it up. In the European Union, it's a more like kind of kid gloves approach to taking that, where, again, some of the specifics. Okay, they're giving you this license, but that license contains terms like we can change the terms of our license at any time. It also contains terms like, okay, we can terminate this at any time for any reason. And like in the case of the crew, not all of them have this one. It also said that you are required to destroy all copies of your game once we terminate it. It says that in the license agreement. Yeah, Ubisoft. You can look up the crew, Steam, EULA, or something. You can probably find it. When you take all those together, in the European Union, I have it memorized now, Directive 9313 EEC, which protects consumers against unfair terms. And if the court's really looking at this, they're probably going to rule these are unfair. It's interesting because all these kind of draconian policies have protected them in places like the United States. It's probably going to work against them in the European Union because it's so oppressive in terms of consumer rights that the regulators are probably going to say, well, yeah, okay, this doesn't meet the standards of, the Directive 93. In which case, that makes the license agreement null and void, which means what? That means it's a no man's land for how the law regards this. Because, okay, so it said this can end at any time, but that license agreement isn't valid because it has all this oppressive things. Well, if the EU Commission says, I forget which, I should have looked it up before this. I think it's like Directive 2019 something, says that governs these for like digital content is what. Except when you look at that directive, it says all over the place, okay, well, it's all about the agreed amount for the duration of the content, Well, there is no duration. It says they can end any time for any reason. So we're back to just no man's land again. So that's why by raising all these complaints on the game, I'm hoping we have a shot at this. And it's also why I think the Citizens Initiative would pass, because we have this situation where the law wasn't ready for this, but if we're showing up with 1 million signatures and a reasonable proposal, then the politicians might say, well, yeah, this should be easy then. My constituencies don't really care about this either way, so I can take this as a political victory lap. So I think that's the most likely outcome if we can get those signatures, though.
You mentioned not really having much hope in the US. I think your best hope is you need a president that has like a 16-year-old gamer son who like bugs him about games dying. That's your best hope.
You honestly might, I hadn't thought of that. That honestly might be or either a president or a billionaire. Because if a billionaire can lobby Congress, it's not technically impossible in the United States, but my entire understanding suggests nothing less than an act of Congress would fix it.
Right.
And I do not have that kind of influence. But
so,
we can get into whatever. You mentioned Pirate Software. The takeaway from Pirate Software's coverage of this is he misrepresented what the movement is about. How intentional that was, I do not know. It could. See, so that's the thing. His biggest video on it, that's his third video. He deleted the previous coverage he did on it. He actually responded to a reply I gave to him where he was saying stuff like, I was talking about us trying to solve the problem. He's saying there is no problem, or games do not need saving. I'm pretty sure that's a direct quote from him. And he's saying he sees it as all as well. Now, I think he deleted his videos because he thought, well, maybe that's not going to win over people as much as trying to dress it up as something it's not. But it's unfortunate. I offered to talk with him about it. So, I mean, if you hate the initiative, you hate it, but at least hate it for what it is. Let's be honest about what we're asking for.
Well, I didn't understand. Like, I remember in one of the videos or in a clip, he said he just didn't want to talk, which that doesn't really make any sense. Like, if you're so confident in the stance you have, why would you not want to discuss the topic like that? I don't really get that.
Well, the reason you gave felt kind of cheap to me. Where in it, I made in my promotional video, I made kind of a half joke, talking about how again, politicians generally don't care about video games. We'd be paving a path for them on this. Look, this happens in politics. This is a distraction. This is a diversion from more serious issues that they may not want to deal with. Like, let's say immigration policy or ending a war or stuff that's like, this is muddy and it makes us look bad. Whereas, video games, this is easy. Let's.
Right.
I think in U.S. Congress, there's been cases where there's like some really serious issues going on. So Congress focuses on like maybe ending daylight savings time instead. Something that's like real softball stuff. So he was conflating with us saying, with us saying like this could pass where this should pass because of that. Where no, those are not the reasons we're pushing this forward. We're pushing this forward because we care about preservation. This is also a huge consumer rights issue. And from my perspective, this is the sane solution to it. Now, once you get into the world of politics, good things do not always happen for good reasons. They happen because of all sorts of factors, many of them very petty or Machiavellian or whatever. So what I was trying to do there was kind of appeal to the doomers in the audience, saying, well, this is never going to pass because because nothing ever happens. So I'm saying, no, there actually is an opening here. That's what I was, because what I didn't want people, the people I was really trying to draw on that are the people who kind of rightfully think that anything good happening for gamers on a legal level just is never going to happen because companies have too much power. A lot of that's well-founded. So I didn't want them to think I'm just some Pollyanna thinking, no, guys, we can do that. Like, no. I'm going to be as cynical as you come on this, and I'm seeing openings. That's what I was trying to convey. So, and I don't know what went on in his head, but yeah, it wasn't, it was frustrating. I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, great. The loudest megaphone out there on this is just misrepresenting what it is. But I guess the only upside to this is one of the initiative members said, well, he read straight from the initiative on the video. So that's he considered that a win. So that is a positive to this. But
yeah, whilst that is annoying. Go on.
I was going to say, it did. I don't know if it was coincidental or not, but the momentum did kind of get killed after that. So we're still picking up the pieces.
Yeah, no, because I know there's a lot of really, really big initial push. You had like videos from I know Asmund talked about it. A bunch of other people talked about it as well. It seemed like there was like a lot of big positivity that came from that. But I guess I don't know. I have seen a lot of the comments under that video, and there's a lot of sort of mixed opinions. And then people like I don't know. Did you comment under the Lewis Rossman video? I'm not sure. I know people.
Yeah, I did.
I know people like that have like talked about it in response. Like Josh Strife Hayes has talked about it as well. And
yeah. Hey, if you think I'm too biased, watch the Lewis Rossman video where it says like, what was it say? His response to Pirate Software's harsh criticism or something like that in the title. He will give, in my opinion, he was too generous, but he gives, I think he understood it like 99% and gives a very even take. So if you're coming at this from a developer standpoint and you think this is going too far, I think he represents all the concerns of that. And I agree with what he was saying, but he also represents what we're trying to do. So he was surprisingly just like on the money on that one. I wish all the analysis was that good.
Yeah, no, I really like Lewis. He does a really good job. Not just in that, just pretty much most of the stuff he does. He's always made great videos.
But yeah, if you're looking for, if you want a very good both sides impression, I think he has the best one.
So a term that you keep using is reasonably playable state, and the criticism I often see is, well, how could an MMO be in a reasonably playable state if it's being hosted as a private server and it has 3 players? And
well, okay, I was hoping more common sense would prevail there. We're talking about we're talking about the software itself being a reasonably playable state. Obviously, if a game isn't as popular and doesn't have thousands of people playing, and it really is just 3 people, that's not something the law should control. That's just the passage of time and organic popularity. So yes, we're talking about the software being in a reasonably playable state. So
yeah, anytime you talk about anything like this, there's going to be people that either intentionally misunderstand it or just I don't know. I actually wish I knew. Maybe look, I'm sure you can come up with some choice words to say about some people.
I've been trying to like raise the alarm on this issue for about 10 years. It's only last year that I finally saw an opening and it just charged for the door on it. And we're seeing how it goes. That's
I think a good question.
I've heard
go on.
I was going to say, I've heard practically every argument you can think of. Sure. Occasionally, there'll be ones I've never heard of before, but they're going to be very kind of esoteric ones. So.
Right, it'll be like, well, what about this specific game that came out 15 years ago with this specific weird model that's not exactly like anything else?
No, not even that. No, the
Okay.
one that got me flat-footed in another interview was, well, what if we got rid of EULAs? User license agreement. I was thinking, wow, well, okay, my brain had not gone there, I admit.
Mhm.
So like I had to explain, well, there actually are reasons to have them,
Mhm.
because they can also say like, okay, maybe technical support does end after 2 years or something, or if it just gives like the basic behavior policy if it is an online game or something like that. So
Mhm.
there are legitimate reasons to have them. It's just not to have onerous terms.
Right, you shouldn't have a EULA that's trying to circumvent the law of the country the game's being sold in. Or in some cases, there just not being a law there to deal with the problem, which is the kind of the state we're in.
I'm honestly, in my mind, it's almost all working backwards from the conclusion, which is let's not destroy games forever. And so I work back, okay, well, what's the most practical way of getting there?
Mhm.
Okay, it's more as a consumer issue rather than a preservation issue because of that, how the law is. So that's where I'm coming from. My mind, it's just working backwards from that conclusion. Like,
Mhm.
how do we not stop destroying games?
Mhm. One thing I do want to ask you is, you said you've been interested in this for like 10 plus years, but there's a lot of people that are obviously been interested in this topic. Why did you decide to start this? Like why are you the person who is doing this? Why did you bother doing it?
Wonderful question. I never wanted to be. And I have multiple videos prior to starting this saying, I'm best as just a mascot for this, or like better to get people who really know what they're doing or, have a larger presence. I guess just nobody stepped up. I mean, or nobody who is in a position, like I have like a medium-sized audience, so I'm able to reach some people on this. I mean, there are people who care about it as much as I do. I know that, but they
Sure.
might not have been in a position to influence much. Though I had a video, I think, geez, might be like 5 years back now, where I talked much more about this called Games as a Service as Fraud. And I unfortunately got some things wrong in that one on the United States. When it comes to US law, just throw out anything I said in that video, but the rest of it holds up. But in that one, I was basically kind of a call for help, saying like, hey, I'm willing to help push this, but I need help on this. And there were a lot of people who were on board in spirit, but there was no real plan. So I don't know why it's me. I think, in fact, in my promotional video for this, I said it's a joke that like we have to go through this much effort just to not get robbed, essentially. I don't know. I mean, I guess this is a constant uphill battle because you have the perception of gamers that, from a lot of them, that they don't realize you can have this is all a conscious decision by companies, and they don't have to have this. I mean, see, in my mind, just the fact that you have World of Warcraft emulators, or I think you mentioned Final Fantasy 14.
RuneScape's a lot further along. RuneScape had private servers before WoW had private servers. Like, they work perfectly.
Those are big, complicated MMO games, and people are running them on home systems. So this is certainly possible, what we're asking for. And like, I understand people getting tripped up over the license arguments where I have to explain this is more in the future, where it's kind of like, you're breaking the cycle where all these licenses that they can't, that just don't allow it now, well, that can be renegotiated in the future if it's a known requirement. I get people getting tripped up on that, but so some people, especially young gamers, don't understand this is even possible first and think I'm just crazy. Another, again, there'll be that think, well, okay, this is reasonable for single player games, but multiplayer, you're going way too far. It's like, well, it's not that different under the law. Let's see, what's the other, geez, I had it on the tip of my tongue. There's another misconception about, oh yeah, that's the hell of this. That's the reason this has taken 10 years, is that this is always a minority of people whenever it happens. Because you have the people who really care are the diehards that really like that game. most people have moved on to another game. So they don't really care about the game once it shuts down. So you're working with this permanent small minority of people who are affected, where it's like a long tail effect, where, you know, you get enough people, there's eventually going to be some old game that they want to replay, you know. I think a lot more people care about this than they realize. It's just they're not going to know it until 10 or 15 years from now. So it's that's the other thing. We're just kind of scrambling to get any attention on this. I feel like every time there's been like talk of reform on like right to repair or more rights in video games, it's like you can't hit the target. It can never hit the target. It always misses. And so just getting this escalated at consumer protection agencies, nothing like this has ever been done before. Like we had a lot of the crew really was a great candidate for this because like the best candidate prior to this would have probably been Overwatch, since that was much bigger and that had 50 million in sales. But the thing is, Overwatch, they shut down Overwatch 1 and then they made Overwatch 2 free. And then they gave like some bonuses to people who own the original. Well, if you're a regulator and don't know anything about video games, you're going to look at that and think, well, this is compensation for the people that bought the original, and just say like, no, this. So it's like to go to all that effort and just get dismissed on like a small thing like that and have to wait, you know, you'll lose all the momentum. So that's what I said, that clean kill aspect of it was really important. But like with Destiny 2, they've removed like tons of levels and content from DLCs, but that's such a muddy issue to explain to regulators who may know nothing about video games. So just you bought it, they shut it down, and then you lost it and they kept your money. That's as simple as it needs to be for regulators.
Right. If you start getting to things like, oh, well, between this WoW expansion and that WoW expansion, this zone was changed and NPCs are no longer there, so certain quests are not accessible. Yeah.
That's for a later date if we have a success. Then you can talk about stuff like that.
Yeah, that's that. Good luck with that one. You will need to wait for people who actually play video games to be regulators to deal with that one.
That's actually another point. That's one area I'm willing to surrender on, is what version of the game that they have for the end of life build. If it's because right now we have nothing most of the time.
Right.
But if they're giving a 1.0 build, or if they're giving the last, 5.2 build, fine, mission accomplished. And, that might upset people if they added a lot of good things, or occasionally, sometimes they like the older version, but we're not trying to dictate which version, because that's just another can of worms.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get a beachhead here. So.
Yeah, again, that can start getting you into weird, like, licensing issues with middleware. Like, a really good example of this, actually, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's kind of the same idea. The PC releases of the older Grand Theft Auto games, over the years, the radios have progressively lost more and more songs because they lost licenses to the songs that was supposed to be playing. So, like, that's like a little bit of content that's been removed, but it's the same thing with any middleware software. Or, like, if you have some library that you have a license for, and then you lose the license for that, and that's the reason you go to a new version, so you can, like, move that library out. You can't just release that old version if you no longer have the license to use that. Like, that's understandable. Like, that gets into other people's copyright, and it's a again, that goes back to rewriting copyright law, and it's a giant mess.
Well, you bring up another good point that people will bring up, is sometimes they'll say like, well, they can't do this because they have copyrighted music, or in the crew they have car brands that, the license for those companies expired. I have never known a game to expire for the player if they already bought it. What that almost always means is they can't sell new copies of it, because, if they had the license to let's say Porsche for a car game. Okay, that license expired. We can't sell copies anymore. I've never heard of squads coming to your house, destroying your old, like, Wii or old disc copy because a Porsche still exists in that game. You bought it, you can still play the old version.
Right, I can go back and play my PS2 copy of, like, Underground 2, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So it's That's I've never known that to not be about just selling new copies of it. So.
Yeah. There was somewhere I was going to go from that. I don't remember what it was. Oh, right. Young gamers. So, how old are you?
I'm 42 now.
Okay. So, I was sort of, I'm 27, so I'm obviously quite a bit younger, but I'm still old enough where
I thought you were older, actually.
Well, I'm still old enough where, like, when I was younger.
Beard, you know.
Yeah. I've had this for a while. It definitely helps. I've never been like ID'd if I want to like go buy alcohol or something. Even when I was 18, no one ever bothered me about it. Anyway, the point I was going to get to there is when I was younger, I remember playing games like COD 4 where you could just connect directly to each other. Or I played a lot of like Quake 3 and Quake 3 modded games where like anyone can just go and run a server and you can just connect to each other, no problem whatsoever. And a lot of people now, like if you're, you know, like 15 now and you play a lot of Fortnite, you might not really know the way the games, or the way that games used to be in the past, that there was a time where if the official servers went down, if the official server browser went down, people could keep these older games around, even though maybe initially there wasn't server software available. It's something that may have like come further down the line.
Well, a couple of things on that. One, for the European Citizens Initiative, I don't have to worry about convincing 15-year-olds because they're not eligible to sign.
Sure,
you have to be at least voting age. Yeah. Don't worry. The adults can hopefully take care of this.
Hopefully.
Yeah, you have to be voting age for that. Another thing. Well, actually, now I'm not even sure, but I think they have less of an excuse with Minecraft because you can
actually, yeah, didn't think of that one.
I honestly don't. Since Microsoft bought it, I don't even know how many layers there are in between. If you just want to host Minecraft and somebody connect to it,
at least for Java, you can just there's like the Java and the Bedrock version. I don't know anything about Bedrock version, but at least the Java version, you can just run a server if you want to.
Yeah, so that they can know about it from that. Another thing I think I forgot to mention, but the European Citizens Initiative is the big one that could change things. This is more along the lines of us exhausting all options, because I don't want to do this ever again, we also have a UK petition going on right now that's been relaunched, because the first one started, but then Parliament got dissolved and it just got shut down prematurely. So now we have a new one. It's been relaunched. If that gets to 100,000 signatures, then it'll be brought to Parliament and they can decide whether to debate it or not. They've given an answer so far, but it's the laziest answer possible. They literally copied the old answer that got rejected by the committee, and they were going to demand a newer answer from the Department of Media, Culture, and Sport, or Culture, Media, and Sport. But then it got shut down, so that never happened. So they just recopied the rejected answer, which doesn't address the issue. They do say no, but then all the reasons are unrelated. They just sound kind of related.
Isn't the TLDR based?
If you're a UK citizen or resident, you can sign that.
Right.
And I think that one is not age bound. So if you are if you are in the UK and 15 years old, double check, but I think you can sign that one.
Yeah, wasn't the TLDR the answer they gave? Basically, it's not UK law, so they're not breaking the law. Like, that's pretty much what they said.
No, it was more along the lines of, they said 3 times some version of, it can be expensive for companies to run servers, or it can be expensive for companies to maintain support for old software or games. You know, it's like, yeah, but we're not asking them to keep supporting it, you know? And we even reworded it to be more specific, you know, to say when they shut it down with no possibility to retain or repair the game, you know? So they're phoning it in. So if we get to 100,000, we can leapfrog over them entirely and just take it straight to Parliament. And it could be this is a dead end, and I just don't know it for the UK side. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure Parliament, we have better odds of Parliament because they'll at least read what we wrote on the request. If they can do that, that automatically puts them ahead of the Department of Culture, Media, and Sports.
We were talking about dumb criticisms before, and I just remembered a really dumb one that I've heard. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of times. It's about them being petitions and people not understanding the difference between a government petition and making a petition on change.org, and how those are completely different things.
Oh, yeah. Guys, like I said, I'm as cynical as they come on this. I never even tried to have a change.org petition. I always said from the get-go, yeah, that's pointless.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what, we're going to appeal to their goodwill? Yeah, maybe that might work for like 1% of company. I mean, first of all, the companies that have that goodwill, they're just going to have the end of life plan in the first place. Like, but yeah, that's just a dead end in my eyes. A government petition, if it passes a certain threshold, they have to respond to it. And it varies on the country how forceful that might be, or if that is the next step towards making law on it. Like in Canada, they gave us a direct response, and they said they gave us a clear answer. Unfortunately, it was them passing the buck, where they said that, like, well, this isn't a federal matter. It has to be done by the provinces. And the thing is that then it gets split up too much so that you can't get that kind of critical mass to affect the industry. In Australia, their answer was kind of dodgy. They kind of talked to both sides of their mouths, but they more or less said, you need to take this up with the ACCC, which we did. Yeah, in fact, the ACCC at first was kind of blowing us off, but pretty much the only like real money we've put towards this on the campaign was we found a law firm in Australia that was, yeah, they're not doing a lawsuit or anything like that. We can't afford that, but they were willing to file an official complaint to them. So it's coming from a law firm, has all these reasons on it. And they did that, and they said they've got it, the agency, it's been escalated. So we're not going to get ignored by the ACCC. Now, who knows what they'll answer, but they'll at least have to take this at least a little bit seriously. So, So yeah, a government petition, there's all sorts of rules that vary with each country. Like some of them can only be a certain length, or they have to have like certain provisions in them. Like in the case of the European Citizens Initiative, we actually had to quote which directives allowed the EU to act on this, and then they had to approve. Yeah, and all of them, they have to approve what you're writing. Like if you're asking for something nonsensical, like you want flying cars, they're just going to dismiss it outright. So just the fact that this gets raised means they think there's enough of a legal argument that this isn't going to be dismissed outright. So.
I know that with there seems to be a lot less restrictions with at least raising them with the UK petitions, because I've seen the list of them, and some of the petitions that are open for the UK are just there's like real dumb ones on there. I don't know what they actually let even be on there. It's just like, hey, pay for my rent or something like that. I don't know if anyone filters them.
They got one like that in the UK?
Yeah.
Was that recently you looked at?
No, it was like a couple of years back, I remember.
Okay, well, the petition committees will cycle out. So maybe
maybe at the time that no one was working.
No, I was going to say that actually is one that should have been rejected by the committee. Pay for my rent. Like no, I mean, like it.
Maybe it got deleted after the fact. I don't know, but it was definitely there when I checked.
Like it can't be just nonsensical, and it can't be. It has to be within the purview of what they can govern. You know, my neighbor painted his house a color I don't like. It's like, well, that's not under our jurisdiction. You know, like you have to take that up with the local council or whatever. Yeah.
So, what has been the reception that you've had from we'll go from players and developers. I'm sure I know there's developers. You have a list of people who've definitely been in support of it, but let's go over those two different ones.
It's well, it's kind of before and after Pirate Software.
Sure, okay.
It's like AD BC kind of a transition where it was overall positive prior to that. I'd say that there were still some objections. The biggest people who would object to it tended to be it's kind of a few categories. One are people who are just super anti-government, thinking, no, the free market needs to solve all this stuff. It's like, I didn't wake up wanting to, I wish the free market would have solved this. I'm only doing this because the free market is promising to make it worse. Like, I think there was that article came out recently saying that like a third of all AAA developers are working on live service games. Or something like that. Like,
with the free market thing, like I know Asmund said this a couple of times before, but like if you actually believe in a true free market, go play an MMO, because you will see what happens with a true free market in an MMO.
Well, I mean, the thing is, isn't the free market about choice? Where's the okay? So, see, that's the thing. I agree with vote with your wallet for some things. Like, if I don't like a game how it looks, I'm not gonna buy it. Fine, like let the free market decide that.
Right.
But if it's like, okay, so here's a game I want to keep, I like it. If I don't buy the game, then it gets destroyed. If I buy the game, then it gets destroyed.
Yep.
Okay, so how am I supposed to solve it doing that? Now, of course, some people say boycotting would be, if I thought that had a chance in hell of working, I would promote that. But again, we've been there before. The infamous one is for, was it Modern Warfare 2? Where there was like a boycott group on Steam. And when that came out, somebody screenshotted just like the first page of the members. And like half of them or more, it showed them as playing Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah.
So it's like, so it's like just from that small sampling of people who have gone out of their way to say they're boycotting this or playing it right now. So like, I think if you look at the buying habits of gamers, like, I think there is some parallel to drug users. It's where,
Not
it's
wrong.
like, if like, oh, that guy's smoking crack. Oh, you think he doesn't know it's not good for him? It's like, see, I have a theory that you can get away with any consumer hostile practice if the game is really good. So it's like if the game's really enjoyable, then you can get away with anything.
I remember when loot boxes were bad, and then Genshin came out, and loot boxes weren't as bad anymore. And it's gonna happen with crypto games as well. There's gonna be some massive game that people want to play. Who cares?
Or just the online only requirement with no guarantee of how long it's gonna last. Look, one of the biggest ones I remember, it set records at the time, was Diablo 3.
Yup.
So Diablo 1, Diablo 2, you can play those offline or online. Diablo 3, it's all online. It had record sales.
People made a lot of noise about it at the time, but didn't matter.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's a lot of people that like to make a lot of noise about stuff, but it can be easy to confuse a lot of noise with a lot of people. Because maybe in the bubble, like, 1,000 people all yelling about something is gonna sound like a lot of people. But if there's 1 million people that bought the game on day one, like, that 1,000 is very tiny.
Yeah. It's... I guess, okay, so players, even after Pirate Software, I'd say among the general populace, I want to say the positive, the negative ratios, just going by comments, is it feels about 15 to 20 to 1 for this versus against it. And the ratio is worse in America, which we have no chance anyway. Like, if you look at, like, I've seen some videos on this, or like in German or French, I've looked at the translation of the comments, the ratio is a lot better. Like, I think they have a better grasp of the consumer rights angle of this. But or it'll be ones where they kind of, like, they're generally in favor of this, but they might want more details.
Right.
For developers, there have been like several positive ones. Yeah, I think our biggest one was Running with Scissors has been very vocal in support of this. But I think the creator of Cookie Clicker is for this. Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. Several indies. Actually, the creators of the Dolphin emulator for, Wii and GameCube, they're for it. So, a lot of like smaller indie ones are in favor of it. The ones that have been against this, I'd say there's kind of two. I've seen a few, not a lot. there are kind of two categories. One, they're either working on a game that it sounds like they're going for a cash grab, like with what they're doing, and they don't. Like those are the ones that got really hostile. Like I tried to respond to a couple people via email. Then, at first it's starting off reasonably, and then like second or third email, it's just like insult bombs all over the place. I'm thinking, okay, yeah. And the other category is, I think the developers can kind of fall into the trap of looking at everything right now.
My Discord, oh my god. If you can hear me, I can't hear you. Discord has been doing this thing for me where it just half breaks. I don't actually disconnect from the call, but for some reason I can't hear you. It will probably reconnect in just a moment. There we go. Now it's saying I'm at 5,000 milliseconds ping. I don't know what's happening. I wish I knew. I probably need to talk to my ISP about this. Jesus Christ. Why is the internet like this? Australian internet. Yeah, I can't hear you. I'm at 5. I don't know why this happens. I'll disconnect. Usually it's reconnected by now. Hello.
1, 2.
Yeah, I don't know why that happens. Yeah, I can hear you just fine now. Yeah, so like, for some reason, what happens is it keeps me connected to the call, but I dropped like 5,000 milliseconds ping. I can no longer hear the person I'm talking to, but it doesn't like properly disconnect.
Sound different now. Like they were like a little more echoey before. Now they're like more pinpointed. Well, you can hear me, so
yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, you never dropped on my end.
I've had this happen with a couple of people now. I'm still trying to work out what the issue is. Anyway, sorry, I forgot what you were saying.
Oh yeah, the developer response.
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying. Yeah, okay. So a few people, it was a small minority. It sounded like they were trying to make something kind of scammy anyway, and were really against. But the others that weren't doing something like that, I think they're kind of hyper focused on the right now. Like, okay, let's say we took a game that was never designed for this and has all these licensing issues, and there's nothing remotely close to like an end of life build. And they're saying, well, no, that's insane. That you know how much work that would be. And that's why I try to emphasize this is more about breaking the cycle rather than saving every last game, because some we may not be able to save, even if we get everything we're asking for. So that's the other issue. And I think there's also, I think it might work, especially like the more knowledgeable you are for some people. Like this isn't just in programming, but this can be in academia. If you've learned your entire career that this is the way things work, and you're hearing something like, no, let's change it all. I've seen resistance to that kind of thinking sometimes. Where I think it depends on your personality. Where, some people will get really good at what they do. So if you're just kind of, rearranging all the pieces with how the workflow this is, there might be just some like knee-jerk resistance to that. Where I think the more serious developers, in my opinion, understand this is doable and this is already a thing in many other industries. Like I think. Yeah, I saw one comment where somebody was saying something like he worked in the health care software industry, and like this is pretty much a requirement. The only reason this isn't done in video games is because people don't die when you don't have an end of life thing. And they're saying for lots of corporate vendors that this is you would have to have this or else you would go out of business. And actually sometimes that's a model they use for extra monetization where they end the support of the package, they include the software, but it's sometimes really cryptic. So they sometimes make extra money continuing to support it past the
Well,
date. Like,
Windows is a
yeah,
good example of this. Windows, Microsoft will sell
Microsoft does that.
additional support for it.
Yeah. So I'd say the ratio of people supporting it is lower among developers, but you know, it's I guess the only not to be too callous, but developers aren't the most important part of this puzzle because we need 1 million signatures. You know, unless they could reach out to a lot, that's the threshold. 1 million total. That's the threshold because now I think developers have a point, and every point is if anything we were asking for is just not possible. And of course, I will hear out any criticism of that, but I haven't heard that because, again, it's in order for this to be impossible, you would have to say that you cannot make a game in the future with an end of life build, you know, and I think it's more than about, well, yeah, you can, but how much effort is that? And also, the games that are probably most affected by this are probably going to be big players that have have fairly large coffers on this that's barely going to dent it. But even for smaller developers, like let's say they're using middleware packages for this stuff to handle their multiplayer. Well, if it's a known requirement in the EU, I think there's going to be a gold rush to come up with the solutions for smaller developers, saying, "Hey, yeah, you just have to hit a few buttons and bam, there's your end of life build if you use our package," and that will, I think, the market will just rush in to fill the requirement.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions from my viewers, and I'll go check, see if there's any more since we started. I think this is a good one to start with, actually. Regarding the EU petition, it has only reached 40%, it's 41% now, of the required votes. Any specific strategy in terms of focusing on getting votes from a specific nation with a large population, IT maturity, and fairly high English literacy, such as Germany, or I guess possibly countries which maybe aren't English, like maybe have a small population, but maybe aren't as big on English speaking? Because I know I've seen like dubs of your videos as well.
Yeah, we're trying, but I'm kind of, as someone who's only fluent in English, operating with one hand tied behind my back here, and I really have to rely on help from others who are bilingual to spread the word on it. So that's been difficult. Yeah, like our target audience isn't even speaking English.
Right.
You know, so people are Polish, Italian, Spanish, French. That's much better, but I only have so much reach. That's again why I'm not the ideal person to do this, but I'm just scrambling here. We have a few more. We have one or two more tricks up our sleeve that we're gonna try before I'd say it looks grim, but again, I'm not ready to call it yet. It's still some more things we can do, but we've tried our best. But when it's dominantly English, then you're kind of relying on the countries that have a higher bilingual population that speaks English as well. So everything's upside down on this, you know, trying to run it. If this was an American petition, like where, you know, there were provisions for that, I think we would have passed it, no problem.
So if anybody wants a side project, and you happen to be bilingual, video dubbing and translating of stuff might be helpful.
Or yeah, actually, if you really want to help, one of the best things you can do is let other gaming streamers or YouTubers know about this, who are, you know, French, Italian, whatever countries in the EU, and just, like, you know, bring it up in a chat if you can. If like, oh, have you heard of the Stop Killing Games thing? That could. We have several members of the initiative who do speak multiple languages. I forget all of them. We have like German, I think we have Latvian, Spanish. And if we don't have the language, we might be able to find somebody who can kind of stand in if you want an interview or something like that. So.
Okay. Another one that I got is I'm sure you already have an answer for this straight away. I'm sure you've probably had people ask you this before, but
fine.
If the EU petition does not pass, is everything over? Is this the end?
No. Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Like, it sure as hell is the end on my end. But the thing is, things are in motion now. We got this escalated at the consumer protection agencies in France, Germany, and Australia. So that I couldn't stop that now, even if I wanted to. And because government moves at a glacial speed, who knows when that's going to get resolved? It's possible we've already won this and we just don't know it yet. But so that'll really be the determinant factor. And even then we might have one extra play in France, but that's something where we already have the participants we need on it. So it's hard to say when it'll be over, but I'm not going to be campaigning after this is it. I'm done on that end. So I mean, I'm still fine with talking to other people, but there's no need for me to just kind of thrust myself on the other places on it. Oh yeah. As far as bringing this up, they don't have to talk to me. They just need to mention stop killing games. You know, if you want to cut me out of it, that's fine. I'm not.
You're very good at
signatures.
you're a good spokesperson. You like to talk a lot. These are the good episodes where I don't have to like nudge the person to keep talking and saying things. I could just leave you, and I reckon you could just talk for 30 minutes without me interrupting you.
I actually have had interviews where the person just left or they cut out or something, but I was still talking to their audience, so I just sort of freestyled what to talk about next.
That's great. So you've talked about how the crew is obviously a perfect case to deal with this, but this is more of like a personal question of, is there a game that you've personally been affected by? Like anything where it's shut down, anything where you've really wanted to play it, and now it is just completely gone, even if it wasn't like good to base the entirety of this around, but something that you personally were bothered by?
Yeah, well, again, against the odds, some of them have come back. They've been kind of like middling games for me so far, but I can see the writing on. See, that's just it. I'm not trying to save the bad ones. I'm trying. It's just you got to get the bad ones with the good ones.
Right.
You know, because yeah, when people say all these live service games are crap, well, not literally all of them. That's the problem.
That is the problem. Yeah, if they're real bad, like, yeah, it's sad that they're going away, cultural preservation, all that, but like, no one would really be bothered if it was like a 3 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly. If it was just the bad games, I never would have done this. But yeah, again, for me, Battleforge was one that I thought it was all right. See, that's the thing. A lot of these games, I don't know how good they are until I play them.
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
but I'm interested in them at the time. And so, yeah, so Battleforge was like that. Dark Spore was like that for me. One, I think it's still going, but it's certainly one worthy of preservation. The Secret World. That's a unique game. That one, I've never played anything else like it, and I have mixed feelings on it, but I really like the parts that I like. Even the crew, a lot of people have argued it's kind of a so-so game, but it's also one of the best representations I've seen of driving across the U.S. It's literally the second biggest driving game ever made. Like, yeah, in all honesty, I think the story is just kind of so-so. Gameplay is kind of typical, but it's like, but you can just keep driving and driving and driving. Like, it gives me that kind of a mood I like to it, you know. But that's a coincidence that I also like the game. I would have done this for Overwatch if everything was lined up, because I've never even played Overwatch. I'm not even that interested in it. But the whole point was to have a game to act as kind of a missile for the issue at large. So this isn't really about the crew. It's about all games of this nature that we did this on.
Okay, here's an interesting one. I feel like I might already know what your thought is here, but I still want to hear what you think. What are your thoughts on games that were designed to be killed? E.g., Super Mario 35. So this was a anniversary Mario game where it was launched, and then at the end of the anniversary year, game died. So it was just an anniversary event. In your opinion, is it important to preserve them or respect the developer's intentions?
Okay, well, was that one where they stopped selling it, or they shut it down, no one can play it?
I believe it was Let me see the exact details. Yeah, it's no longer playable, even if you have a copy.
Okay, well, I think that no, I don't think that. I don't like that.
Mhm.
I mean, again, I would grudgingly accept it if they did they give you the exact date at the time they sold
I
it?
believe
That it
so,
was shut down?
yes.
I don't like it, but I might have to grudgingly accept stuff like that.
Hmm.
It would be my answer. Yeah, there. Yeah, okay, that's
Yeah,
I
it
actually
lasted for
literally only
exactly 6 months. Yeah, yeah, it was just the
okay,
anniversary event.
and like from day one, they told you this is going to be unplayable after 6 months.
I believe so.
Okay, if that's the case, then I don't like it, but I grudgingly accept it.
Hmm.
Yeah, there was another one like that that was, I think it was called The Flock,
Hmm.
where it was a multiplayer game where every time somebody died, there was like this large collective counter and it counted down to 0. And once it got to the end, the game was going to be unplayable.
Mm.
And what ended up happening was it lost interest and they couldn't afford to keep the servers running. So it just got shut down prematurely from their own experiment. See, something like that I see more as like performance art.
Right.
But even that didn't live up to its own thing. But
The game has
this is
mostly
such a
negative on
rare
Steam.
scenario. What? It's on Steam?
The game has mostly negative.
Yeah, I bet. Like, but see that's one you can make an argument as performance art.
Right, right.
I'm more sensitive to this issue where I just don't like seeing games destroyed. Period. I
Hmm.
mean, in one of my videos, I said for me personally, it's the same as if you were to go into a museum and set fire to one of the paintings. I mean, it's
Hmm.
like even for bad games, I can appreciate aspects of them sometimes. Like sometimes hey, one game I'm interested in that everybody says is bad is Anthem. Just because I
Mm.
want to see that world. It's like, okay, this alien planet with canyons and waterfalls and sure. I'm not going to go in there expecting a great game, but I want to just check out, see what they worked on, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah, there's the saying one man's trash is another man's treasure. So it can be, but yeah, what you described, it's such a rare scenario. I'm not really that worried about
Right.
that. Because how many companies, yeah, Nintendo's an oddity where they tend to operate more, I've heard they operate more like a toy manufacturer where you do have limited editions and that raises the value of stuff
Hmm.
and like for collectors and stuff. And that's kind of a image that they want. Almost every company, if you want to keep buying their game, they want to keep selling it to you if they
Hmm.
can, you know?
Yeah. Well, even in cases like there are games on Steam which don't even run on modern systems at this point. Like the requirement is an XP system. You try to boot it on a modern system, it just will not work. Like if you are willing, like, obviously they probably shouldn't do that if the game doesn't work anymore on modern systems, or at least have a note there. But like if people are willing to buy it, they're gonna sell it to you.
Yeah, if they give the warning, I mean, I guess as long as they're not requiring you. Yeah, yeah. The,
Well,
the
Valve has
only
good
area
refunds
that
now, so if it
gets
doesn't work anymore, like, it doesn't boot.
well,
Like you
the
could just
only
refund
area
it.
that gets yeah, I know, but the area that gets ugly on is if you're required to use like Windows 10 or Linux build to run it, but then you can't run it on XP without Steam, and then Steam's no longer support. Like if they catch 22, don't catch 22 people.
Mhm. Oh, do we disconnect again? Oh, that's a hard disconnect. Uh. Hello? What? I hate this platform. I hate this platform so much. Or my ISP, I don't know what it is. It's something. We're back now.
So, okay. Yeah, so just don't catch 22 people where you have if you can have the same if you have to run the game on a different OS than the one you downloaded on, that's fine.
Mhm.
But if they artificially make it impossible without a crack or something, then
Mhm.
no, that's not at all.
Yeah.
So,
There was something I was gonna say before I disconnected and lost my train of thought. I don't remember what it was actually. Uh, shit. Um. Okay, whatever. We'll just go to. Well, maybe I'll remember it afterwards. So there's one person here asking. We kind of talked about this a bit before, but sort of the connections between this and the way that software works. So what they say is, what are your thoughts on if the initiative covered video games and software in general? Would there be more signatures? Would in addition of general software help the initiative?
I think that's a good question. There might be more signatures, but there would also just be like 10 times the opposition.
Right.
Because then you're messing with
Adobe.
Geez, like if for software in general, that invites Microsoft into the party in a big way. Like I think Amazon, Google, we're talking titans at that point. I mean, yeah, Microsoft still does a lot with gaming, but they don't care about that the way they care about, Windows or OneDrive or cloud services. Yeah, Office software. That would be so. You raise an interesting point that if I had to relaunch, that seems like the only way to do it to try to get to me. But it leaves so much more it invites so much more industry opposition to the point where it could get watered down to something that just that misses games again. Is what I think could happen.
This is unrelated, and it's sort of like it kind of related to something you said before, but unrelated to the whole stopping from game things. What is your thought on Valve dropping support for older versions of Windows and like actually just not letting the client work? It doesn't, like, XP is dropped, Windows 7 was dropped at the start of this year. What are your general thoughts on that, just as an idea?
Personally, I find it a little alarming, and I kind of wish there was a better standard for end of life of games. I guess what I'm thinking is, I'm generally pretty open-minded with whatever the hell the seller or the publisher wants to do, as long as I get to keep my game by the end of it. So it's like, okay, if you want me to jump through some hoops with a login, or I need to have this stuff, it's like, okay, I can roll with the punches. But if you're going to remove the game from me at the end of all this, that just bothers me on such a level that I started a whole campaign on this sort of thing. I really don't like that, but that's a fuzzier area. Especially because I'm kind of scared where Microsoft is going with Windows, because I'm on Windows, and my line in the sand is if there's ever a future Windows where you have to connect online to use it, like to install. And I think for regular users,
they're getting real
Windows
close to
is
it.
already there.
It's getting really hard to set up Windows without having a Microsoft account.
Yeah, there are hoops. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to do that, to get it to not forcibly update your system or to not have a local account. It's still possible for power users, but it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So I'm still kind of holding on with that. If they get to the point where it is just impossible, then like at that point, like I can't. I wouldn't use that for anything I don't have to, where it would just be just the bare minimum of maybe online games that require that, and everything else I would have to use something else. So. And with Steam going along lockstep with that alarms me. However, Steam is doing more for Linux and gaming than practically anything. So I'm glad they are kind of building their own fire escape there.
Yeah,
too, so.
Whilst I might have issues with some of the stuff Valve does, it's just like you make one bad choice for every 10 good choices. Like, yes, I'm gonna criticize the bad things you do as well, but at the same time, right? Like, overall, you're making a positive change.
Yeah, Valve is a mixed bag, is the way I look at it. I really like what they've done with Linux support. I like what they've done with VR. Steam VR is kind of like, I would almost compare it to like the equivalent of what DirectX was to Windows gaming when that came out. When before then, you had to have everybody had their own specialized drivers included with the game for this hardware and that one. And unfortunately, I think we're kind of drifting more back towards that. But it's they don't. I really wish they would kind of do more to ensure, even if it's just a public statement from the company or public policy to ensure that you will get to keep more of your games. But and I also think for the amount of resources they have, they could do a lot more. But when you compare them to other companies, then they look like, angels. So it's kind of, doesn't mean I think they are that way, but just it's more like how bad other companies can get.
I've been looking.
I have mixed views on Valve, I guess.
I've been looking through my comments here, and I was like, "Hey guys, do you have any questions for Ross?" And then half the comments are either Pirate Software or Mana Gem. Like, can you guys? I hate my audience sometimes.
Well, they should. I might be talking in the future with somebody whose drama is his whole thing. So, I gotta stick around.
Okay, here's one actual real comment.
Okay, real question.
Okay, it's regarding the way that games are sold nowadays, where you're buying a license to a game, not like you're not actually buying a product in the same sense. And I guess it's the idea where if you're buying a license to it, should they be able to rescind that license? Why would they have to keep that going for you?
Well, again, that kind of depends on the country, how you're looking at. I think I'm fuzzy on that. I think in Australia, games matching a certain description are considered goods. So it's like, yeah, you have a license to clarify the term. See, that's the other thing. In the UK and the EU is, yeah, you have licenses that say what you can and can't do, but those aren't legal documents and they can't override statutory consumer rights.
Right.
Now, in the US, I mean, it gets complicated, but the simple version is they can almost do whatever they want. And keeping your game is not one of those things that's on the list that's in question. I mean, I think, again, it's kind of what I said. Like, I'm pretty flexible on almost anything the companies want to do, except actually destroying the game permanently that you paid for. And it's like, I mean, that goes against just like the basic. Yeah, I was thinking, I think you have to go back almost to feudalism before that's like a standard that's acceptable. Because, you go to you go to some old market in history, you buy something, you keep it. If you go to something where you bought it, but the lord of the manor can come into your home and take it back, I think you have to go to feudal times before you get to that. I mean, you're not really talking about market dynamics then. I mean, it's...
Here's one. How do you feel about the Linux user mentality towards open source software and free tech in general? And do you feel like that sort of helps the preservation of games and media?
Oh, of course. I mean, I love it when that happens because, like I mentioned, I like VR. When it's open source, they can monkey in there and make it render in stereoscopic, or they'll add things like widescreen and, better controls, bug fix. I mean, it's only a positive, really. I mean,
yeah,
from the player.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, here we go. Now we're back to the fun ones. This is one of the probably criticisms you probably heard before. Would he be fine if his initiative stopped many games from releasing in the EU? If so, how? You probably heard this a million times before.
Oh, yeah. I even have a video where I address this. I think it's a complete bluff by like from any company of a major size. There could be a little bit disruption, like let's say it passed and then it goes into effect in like early 2027 or something. If somebody was like had just really unlucky timing with that, and they were too far down that pipeline to be able to have an end of life build, then they might cut it for a smaller developer, but then it would get worked out over time. For large ones, there's too much money on the table for them to do that. So, okay, what's going to be, what would you rather do? Let's pretend you're a AAA gaming company, you're making a live service game, and that's going to have like loot boxes and microtransactions. You're trying to be the next Fortnite or something.
Mm-hmm.
What would you rather do? Have compliance that you will have a build of the game if in the event that you need to end support, and I'm not sure what the cost on that would be, but I would guess less than 1% if it's, or cut yourself out from the EU market, which again has 450 million people in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're going to make, I mean, I'm not sure what the projected revenue for like a game like Fortnite, let's say a theoretical Fortnite killer, which they want to aim for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're probably talking like hundreds of millions of dollars. So, whereas even if it's done a little sloppily, an end of life build for a game of that scale might be, I don't know, I'm just taking numbers out of the air, but like, let's say 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So would you rather have like $200 million or save 100,000? Like that companies like to make money. Okay. So they're going to take the path of least resistance on that, and that maximizes their profit. So if one analogy I made a lot is to seatbelts. Before it became law that manufacturers had to include seatbelts, companies were fighting that tooth and nail on in the 60s, trying to say like, no, we won't be able to sell cars if this is a requirement. And it's like, and you know what? They did that. It does take some cost. Like if you have a factory already set up and seatbelts aren't part of the assembly line, then yeah, you're gonna have to retool your factory, order new parts for the seat. But a modern car now, what does the seatbelt cost? I would guess probably less than 1% of the total cost of manufacturing. I think it's very similar.
If you want to have a lot of fun, I highly recommend after this, go on YouTube and look at some interviews of people, of consumers talking about how they don't want the seatbelt laws to come in because they're the funniest things you will ever see. Same thing, go look at interviews of people when DUI laws were coming in because people talked about how they could drive so well when they were drunk. They're gonna keep driving drunk. It is the funniest thing you will ever see.
It's probably too close to home now for me to be that funny to me, but that is the lens I'm looking at this.
Sure.
Like, I think some of the people who hate this idea the most, if it were to pass 5-10 years from now, they'd probably say, okay, well, it wasn't that big a deal. Look, hey, with refunds for games on Steam, I remember seeing a backlash against that, saying, oh, this
yes.
Small indie developers, and like, oh, people are going to exploit and abuse this. And yeah, there was a little bit of that. I mean, but it didn't tank the industry. Indie games are still getting made, you know, so it's, I think that's a very apt analogy to that.
And, okay, one last thing I want to ask. And this is sort of about games where there is a sequel. So let's say Apex Legends 2 comes out. And they either, as you've talked about, releasing network documentation or releasing server binaries. There's the idea where the sequel is very likely going to use a very similar network architecture to the first game. And I'm sure you've heard arguments like if you do that, it's going to increase cheating or bots and things like that.
Yes, that is a risk. I admit, but companies will get to see it coming down the line. That's another reason why they might want to say, okay, hey, let's just come up with different code for our end of life build and, you know, patch the client so that we're not using the same protocols for the final version so that there's not as much of a trail for people to follow for cheats. Because again, like any game, pretty much any big multiplayer game, it's going to get assaulted by trying to find hacks for cheats or exploits. So that's something that already happens. Yes, this would increase the risk a little bit, but that's a solvable problem. Like, I'm not claiming this wouldn't cause some industry disruption, and that is a valid concern, but you have to weigh that against destroying games, 97-98% of online games that people buy so that they can never play them again. Again, these are games people have paid money for, you know, so you kind of have to balance consumer rights with developer rights on that, is the way I look at it.
Sweet. Well, on that note, I guess we can start signing off there. Where can people find Stop Killing Games, find your stuff, and yeah, anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, okay. Well, to help with the initiative, again, the big ones are the UK petition and the European Citizens Initiative. Everything else is kind of underway. That's all at stopkillinggames.com. It's a pretty Spartan website. It's just it was originally meant to just direct people to the agencies and give them instructions. And we're gonna rework it a little bit. But for my videos, I don't even want to be doing any of this. I mean, it's fun talking to you, but
well, hey, if you want to, like,
campaign
I don't know, talk about video games and not talk about Stop Killing Games or whatever else you want to do on the channel.
I honestly was hoping there'd be some of that, but we went on. I'm normally kind of fun, comedy videos, usually about video games or related to stuff like that. That's at accursefarms.com, or probably the most famous thing I've done is Freeman's Mind, where I just kind of voice through. I kind of give the thoughts of Gordon Freeman in Half-Life to try to make it as interesting as possible.
Wait a second. Hold up. You did that video. Wait.
What?
I didn't realize that was your video till just now.
Oh, yeah. I'm one of the voices of Freeman here.
Someone sent me that video ages ago. I didn't even realize that.
I can recite the quantum chromodynamic gauge invariant Lagrangian in my sleep. That was one of my lines.
Is there anything else you want to mention, or is that pretty much it?
Oh, that's it for the initiative stuff. I'm kind of sick of talking about it, too.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
I mean, I could talk about fun stuff if you wanted to,
but... Well, hey, if you ever want to come back and do another one of these, I would be more than happy to never talk about the Stop Killing Games stuff and just talk about video games.
More about Linux and gaming and stuff in general.
Yeah, awesome. Nothing else you want to shout out? Is that pretty much everything that people should know about?
I think that's it. Stop killing games. Yeah, just try to tell other people about this. That's the message. Like, we can still, if we can get a big person or else several medium-sized people, like, again, YouTubers and streamers, we can win this. That's the thing to focus on. We need signal amplification. So.
Okay. My stuff, my main channel is Brody Robertson, who do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games. Right now, I am probably still streaming Ender Magnolia and Final Fantasy Origin Strangers of Paradise. Very fun games. I've got the React channel, upload clips there. Check that out. That's Brody Robertson Reacts. If you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. If you'd like to find the audio version, it is on Spotify. There is an RSS feed. I upload the video to Spotify as well, so if you like that, yeah, do that as well. I give you the final word. How do you want to sign us off?
I like your desk mat.
Thank you. Perfect.